The September air hung thick and heavy as the Torres family's wagon creaked up the final stretch of dirt road leading to their new property. Manuel Torres wiped sweat from his brow, his weathered hands firm on the reins as he guided their two tired horses. Beside him, his wife Elena clutched their youngest child, Maria, to her chest. In the back, their sons Joaquin, 15, and Roberto, 12, peered out at the rolling Oklahoma landscape with curious eyes. "There it is," Manuel announced, pointing to the weathered structure that crowned the gentle hill ahead. "Our new home." The homestead was modest but sturdy, a two-story wooden farmhouse with a broad porch and several outbuildings scattered across the property. The previous owner, a widower named Harrison Miller, had sold it to them for a surprisingly reasonable price before departing suddenly for California. The land was good, 20 acres of fertile soil, a reliable creek running along the eastern edge, and enough pasture for the livestock they planned to raise. "It looks quiet," Elena remarked, her voice carrying an undercurrent of concern. "It's perfect," Manuel assured her. "Far from town means far from trouble. No one to question where we came from or why we're here." The Torres family had left their home in Texas after a series of incidents, racial tensions that had escalated to threats. Oklahoma territory represented a fresh start, a place where a Mexican-American family might build something without the weight of prejudice following them. As they approached, Joaquin noticed something odd. "Pa, look at the windows." Manuel squinted. Every window on the house's facade was open, despite the property having been vacant for nearly 2 months. Probably just aired it out before leaving, Manuel reasoned, though his voice betrayed uncertainty. They pulled up to the front of the house, and Manuel helped his family down from the wagon. Elena stood motionless, staring at the structure. "What is it?" Manuel asked. "Something doesn't feel right," she whispered. "It's too quiet. No birds." Manuel looked around and realized she was correct. The typical chorus of prairie birds was notably absent around the property. "It's late in the day," he said dismissively. "They've gone to roost." Roberto jumped down from the wagon and ran toward the house, excited to explore, but stopped abruptly at the bottom of the porch steps. "Roberto?" Elena called. "What's wrong?" The boy pointed to the front door, which hung slightly ajar. "Someone's been here." Manuel approached cautiously, hand instinctively moving to the revolver holstered at his hip. He pushed the door open with his foot. The interior was dim, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows through the open windows. Dust motes danced in the light beams. "Hello," he called out. No response. The family gathered on the porch behind Manuel as he stepped inside. The house was sparsely furnished, a table, some chairs, a hutch in the dining room, just as Miller had described in his letters. "Look," Joaquin said, pointing to the floor. A trail of dark footprints led from the front door toward the staircase, as if someone had walked through mud. But when Manuel bent to examine them more closely, he realized with a chill that the substance wasn't mud at all. It was dried blood. Elena gasped, clutching Maria tighter. "Maybe an animal got in," Manuel suggested, though he didn't sound convinced. "You all wait here. I'll check upstairs." "Manuel?" "No," Elena protested. "Let's go to town, find the sheriff." "And tell him what?" "That we found some stains in our new house? We've barely arrived and already we're causing trouble?" Manuel shook his head. "No, we stay. This is our home now." As he ascended the creaking stairs, following the dark trail, a sense of dread settled over the family below. The footprints led to the door of the master bedroom, which was closed. Manuel's hand trembled slightly as he reached for the knob. The bedroom door swung open with a prolonged creak. Manuel stood frozen in the doorway, his breath caught in his throat. The room was orderly bed-made, curtains drawn back, but something was deeply wrong. The air felt stagnant, heavy with an unidentifiable smell that wasn't quite decay, but something equally unsettling. "Manuel?" Elena called from downstairs. "What do you see?" He couldn't answer immediately. His eyes were fixed on the far wall, where a series of words had been carved into the wooden panels. "They come at night. They watch." Below the message, the blood trail ended at the closet door. "Nothing," he finally called down, not wanting to frighten his family. "Just an empty room." The lie felt bitter on his tongue. Manuel approached the closet cautiously, revolver drawn now. With his free hand, he pulled the door open quickly, prepared for anything, or so he thought. The closet was empty except for a small wooden box on the floor. The box was intricately carved with symbols he didn't recognize, circles intersecting with triangles. Strange runes etched along the edges. There was no visible lock or latch, yet the box seemed firmly sealed. Against his better judgment, Manuel picked it up. It was surprisingly heavy for its size and unnaturally cold to the touch. Something shifted inside when he moved it, a sliding sound followed by what sounded like whispering. Manuel nearly dropped it, convinced momentarily that he'd heard voices emanating from within. He tucked the box under his arm and made a quick inspection of the remaining upstairs rooms, 2 smaller bedrooms and a modest bathroom. Everything else appeared normal, undisturbed. Downstairs, Elena was directing the boys to bring in essential supplies from the wagon. Maria sat on a blanket on the floor, playing with a rag doll. "Everything's fine," Manuel announced, hiding the box behind his back. "Just an empty house waiting for a family to fill it." Elena's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Then what's that behind you?" Reluctantly, Manuel revealed the box. "I found this upstairs, probably left behind by Miller." "What's inside?" Joaquin asked, reaching for it. Manuel pulled it away. "I don't know yet. Let's get settled first." As the family unloaded their possessions, Manuel discreetly placed the box in a saddlebag, intending to examine it later. The blood trail troubled him deeply, but he convinced himself it could have been from a wounded animal that had somehow gotten into the house. By dusk, they had arranged their essential belongings. Elena prepared a simple dinner of beans and tortillas, which they ate at the kitchen table by lantern light. An uncomfortable silence hung over the meal. "Tomorrow we'll ride into town," Manuel finally said. "Purchase supplies, meet our neighbors." "I think I saw another farm about 2 miles back," Roberto offered. "I saw smoke from a chimney." "Good," Manuel nodded. "It's always good to know who lives nearby." After dinner, the children were settled into the 2 smaller bedrooms. Maria would sleep with Elena and Manuel for now, in the master bedroom. As Elena prepared the children for bed, Manuel took the opportunity to examine the box outside. Under the waning moon, he sat on a tree stump near the barn and turned the strange container over in his hands. He noticed something he'd missed before: tiny holes drilled into the top, as if to allow air inside. The thought made his skin crawl. Using his pocket knife, Manuel attempted to pry the box open along its seams. The blade slipped, slicing his thumb. A drop of blood fell onto the box's surface, and Manuel watched in horror as the wood seemed to absorb it, the crimson liquid disappearing into the grain. At that moment, a sound from the surrounding darkness made him jump. A rustling in the tall grass beyond the yard, too deliberate to be the wind. "Who's there?" Manuel called, hand moving to his revolver. The rustling stopped. Silence stretched for several long seconds. Then, from much closer than before, came a sound that turned Manuel's blood to Isa low. Rattling breath, like someone struggling to draw air through a damaged throat. Dawn broke reluctantly the next day, the sunrise obscured by a thick blanket of fog that had settled over the property during the night. Manuel had barely slept, his mind replaying the strange breathing sound he'd heard. After the unsettling incident, he'd hurried inside, locking every door and window despite the unseasonable heat. The box now sat on the kitchen table where the family gathered for breakfast. Manuel had shared the disturbing events with Elena after the children were asleep. "We should leave," Elena said quietly, ensuring the children couldn't hear as they ate. "This place doesn't feel right." "And go where?" Manuel countered. "We spent everything we had on this land. We have nowhere else." He glanced at the box. "Besides, it's probably nothing. Old houses make strange noises, and the writing on the wall. The blood? The box that drinks blood?" Elena's voice trembled. "These are not normal things, Manuel." Before he could respond, they heard the sound of approaching horses. Manuel moved to the window, hand instinctively reaching for his revolver. Through the lifting fog, he could make out 2 riders approaching the house. A man and a woman, both white, both dressed in simple farming clothes. "Visitors," Manuel announced. "Stay inside." He stepped onto the porch, weapon concealed but ready, and waited as the riders approached. They stopped a respectful distance from the house. "Good morning," the man called, tipping his hat. He appeared to be in his 50s, with a gray-streaked beard and weathered skin. "Hope we're not intruding. Name's Joseph Bedford. This is my wife, Martha. We farm about 2 miles east." "Manuel Torres," he replied cautiously. My family and I just arrived yesterday." Martha Bedford studied the house with an unreadable expression. She was thin, almost gaunt, with sharp features and eyes that seemed to take in everything. "You've purchased the old Miller place, then?" Joseph asked. Manuel nodded. "Yes. Mr. Miller sold it to us before heading to California." The Bedfords exchanged a quick glance that Manuel couldn't interpret. "May we come in?" Martha asked suddenly. "We've brought some preserves as a welcome gift." She held up a cloth-covered basket. Manuel hesitated, then nodded. "Of course. My wife and children are inside." As the Bedfords dismounted, Manuel noticed Joseph scanning the property, his eyes lingering on the barn and then the second-floor windows of the house. Inside, Elena greeted the visitors with polite reserve. The children stayed close to her, observing the strangers curiously. Martha placed the basket on the table, then froze when she noticed the carved box. "Where'd you get that?" Her voice had lost all warmth. Manuel and Elena exchanged glances. "It was in the house when we arrived," Manuel answered carefully. "Upstairs." Joseph moved closer to his wife, placing a restraining hand on her arm. "You haven't opened it, have you?" he asked, his tone deceptively casual. "No," Manuel said. "It seems to be sealed." Martha's eyes hadn't left the box. "It's not meant to be opened, ever." She looked directly at Elena. "You have children. If you care for them, you'll bury that thing deep." Elena paled, instinctively gathering Maria closer. "I don't understand," Manuel said. "It's just a box." "No," Joseph said quietly. "It's not." He sighed, seeming to come to a decision. "I think you folks need to know about Harrison Miller. The real story, not whatever he told you in his letters." Martha nodded grimly. "They need to know what happened to his family." "His family?" Elena repeated. "He told us he was a widower, that his wife died of fever years ago." Joseph shook his head slowly. "Miller had a wife and 3 children. They didn't die of any fever. 2 months ago," Martha continued, "the entire Miller family disappeared. Just vanished one night. The sheriff came out when concerned neighbors reported not seeing any of them for days. Found the house empty, no sign of struggle except—" She glanced at the box again. "Except for blood on the floor," Manuel finished, a chill running down his spine. Leading upstairs, Joseph nodded grimly. "And that box sitting in the middle of the living room floor. Not in a closet. The sheriff took it as evidence," Martha added. "Or at least he was supposed to." The implication hung heavily in the air. "You saying Miller killed his family?" Manuel asked, keeping his voice low so the children wouldn't understand. Joseph and Martha exchanged another look. "We're saying," Joseph replied carefully, "that 5 people vanished without a trace. A week later, Miller shows up alone, claiming they'd moved to his brother's in California while he stayed behind to sell the property. No one believed him," Martha said flatly. "But there was no evidence, no bodies. The sheriff questioned him for days, but eventually had to let him go. And then he sold the property to us," Elena whispered, horrified, "at half its value." "He was desperate to be rid of it," Joseph confirmed. "Left the territory the same day the sale was finalized." Manuel felt his world tilting. They had invested everything in this property, this fresh start. "What are you suggesting we do?" "Leave," Martha said without hesitation. "Today. Now. Before nightfall." Joseph placed a calming hand on his wife's shoulder. "What my wife means is, there's a history here you should be aware of. Before the Millers, the previous owners also left suddenly, and before them, ... How many?" Manuel demanded. "For families in the past 15 years, Joseph admitted. None staying longer than a year." "And the box?" Elena asked, staring at the carved container with new fear. "What is it?" Martha stood abruptly. "It doesn't matter what it is. What matters is what it contains." She moved toward the door. "We've said what we came to say. The decision is yours." Joseph followed more reluctantly. At the door, he turned back. "If you choose to stay, keep your doors locked at night, all of them. And whatever you hear outside, don't look." The remainder of the day passed in tense discussion. Manuel and Elena weighed their options in hushed tones while the children explored the yard under their watchful eyes. The box remained on the kitchen table, untouched, like a malevolent centerpiece. "We can't just leave," Manuel argued. "Everything we have is invested here." "Everything except our lives," Elena countered, her voice sharp with fear. "You heard what they said. 4 families, Manuel, all gone." Manuel ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "They were trying to scare us off. White folks don't want Mexicans moving in claiming good land. Is that what you truly believe? That it's just prejudice?" Elena challenged. "What about the blood, the writing on the wall that you tried to hide from me?" Manuel had no response for that. The evidence was too peculiar, too specific to be merely fabricated to drive them away. As the debate continued, Roberto and Joaquin discovered something in the far corner of the property, a small family cemetery overgrown with weeds. 4 graves, all marked with simple wooden crosses. 3 of the markers had names: Elizabeth Connolly, 1872 to 1888, Thomas Connolly, 1849 to 1888, and Sarah Connolly, 1851 to 1888. The 4th cross bore no name, just a crude etching of what looked like the box from the house. When the boys reported their discovery, Manuel and Elena reached a compromise. They would stay one more night, keeping watch in shifts. If anything unusual occurred, they would leave at first light, abandoning the property but preserving their lives. As dusk approached, Manuel secured the house. He nailed shut the windows in the master bedroom, covering the carved message with a blanket. The family gathered in the living room where they would all sleep together. Manuel kept his revolver loaded and within reach. "What happens now, Pa?" Joaquin asked as darkness enveloped the house. Now we wait, Manuel replied, trying to sound reassuring, and see if our neighbors were telling tallies or truths. Elena lit a lantern, its glow casting long shadows across the room. Maria had fallen asleep on a makeshift pallet, while Roberto and Joaquin sat tensely on the sofa. No one mentioned the box, which Manuel had moved to a high shelf, though everyone's eyes occasionally drifted toward it. The first unusual occurrence happened just after 9 o'clock. The temperature in the room dropped suddenly, noticeably, despite the lingering summer heat outside. Elena could see her breath misting in front of her face. "The fire," she whispered, nodding toward the hearth where Manuel had built a small blaze. Psst! The flames were now burning an unnatural blue color. Manuel stood slowly, revolver in hand. "Stay together," he instructed, moving toward the window to peer outside. The moonlit yard appeared empty, still. Then movement caught his eye, a shadow detaching itself from the barn, moving with an odd, jerking gait toward the house. Manuel squinted, trying to make out details, but the figure remained indistinct, as if the darkness itself had taken form. "Someone's out there," he whispered, cocking his weapon. Elena gathered the children closer. "Don't go out there, Manuel, please." Another shadow emerged from behind a tree, then another from the direction of the small family cemetery. Soon 5 distinct shapes were converging on the house, moving with that same unnatural motion. A sound began to build, that same rattling breath Manuel had heard the previous night, but now multiplied, a chorus of labored respirations surrounding the house. "They're at the doors," Joaquin said, his voice trembling. "Listen." Indeed, soft scratching noises could be heard at every entrance, fingernails or claws dragging across wood. Manuel positioned himself between his family and the front door, which had begun to shudder slightly as if something were leaning against it. "What do they want?" Roberto whispered. Before anyone could answer, a new sound filled the room, coming from the shelf where Manuel had placed the box. A faint whisper, rapidly growing louder, forming words that were almost recognizable but spoken in a language none of them understood. The box began to vibrate, inching closer to the edge of the shelf. "It's calling them," Elena realized with horror. "Whatever's in there. It's calling to them." The pressure against the doors and windows intensified. Wood creaked and glass rattled in its frames. The blue flames in the hearth suddenly extinguished themselves, plunging the room into darkness except for the lantern's feeble glow. In that moment of heightened terror, the box fell from the shelf, landing on the floor with a heavy thud. Upon impact, its lid finally opened. The open box lay on the floor, a black void within its wooden confines that seemed to absorb the lantern light rather than reflect it. For one terrible moment, nothing happened. Then a sound emerged, a high, keening wail that vibrated through the room, causing the windows to shudder in their frames. Maria woke with a startled cry, and Elena clutched her tightly. From the bottomless darkness of the box rose something that defied description. Not quite smoke, not quite liquid, but a churning mass of shadow that moved with purpose. It hovered above the container momentarily before beginning to take shape. "Don't look at it," Manuel commanded, backing toward his family, revolver aimed uselessly at the manifestation. "Close your eyes." But none of them could look away as the shadow solidified into a form both familiar and horrifically wrong, a human figure, but twisted, elongated in ways that human bodies shouldn't be. Its limbs were too long, joints bending at unnatural angles. Where its face should have been was only a blank expanse of darkness, yet somehow they all sensed it was watching them, studying them. Outside, the scratching at the doors intensified, becoming frantic, desperate. The temperature in the room dropped further, frost crystallizing on the windows despite the season. The shadow being drifted toward them, leaving a trail of black residue on the floorboards. As it approached, Manuel fired his revolver. The bullet passed through the entity without resistance, embedding itself in the wall behind. "The box," Elena suddenly gasped. "We have to close it." Manuel understood immediately. He lunged toward the open container, but the shadow being moved faster, interposing itself between him and the box. "Joaquin," Manuel called to his eldest son. "Circle around, get to the box." The boy, terrified but resolute, nodded. As Manuel drew the entity's attention, Joaquin crept along the edge of the room. The shadow being seemed aware of their plan. It expanded, tendrils of darkness reaching out toward Joaquin. One touched his arm and the boy screamed in pain, his skin instantly blackening with frostbite where contact had been made. "Run!" Elena shouted, pushing Roberto toward the kitchen. "Get out of the house!" But the doors remained blocked by whatever lurked outside. They were trapped. Manuel fired again, more out of desperation than hope. This time the entity reacted, recoiling from the sound or the light of the muzzle flash. Manuel fired repeatedly, driving it back just enough for Joaquin to dive forward and reach the box. As his hands closed around it, the shadow being emitted another wail, this one filled with fury. It rushed toward him, but Joaquin had already slammed the lid shut. The effect was immediate. The entity convulsed, its form destabilizing. The tendrils retracted, the mass contracting in on itself. With a final, ear-splitting shriek, it dissolved into the air, leaving behind only a lingering cold and the acrid smell of burnt metal. Outside, the scratching stopped abruptly. Through the frost-covered windows, Manuel could see the shadowy figures retreating, melting back into the darkness from which they'd emerged. The family huddled together in shocked silence, Joaquin nursing his blackened arm, Maria sobbing quietly against Elena's shoulder. "Is it over?" Roberto finally whispered. Before anyone could answer, the box in Joaquin's hands shuddered violently. Cracks appeared in its surface, spreading like veins across the ancient wood. Light, brilliant golden light began to seep through these fissures. "Let go," Manuel shouted, but too late. The box exploded in a flash of blinding light, sending Joaquin sprawling backwards. When their vision cleared, the box was gone, reduced to ash that scattered across the floor. In its place lay a small leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. Manuel approached cautiously, using his handkerchief to lift the book. Opening it revealed handwritten entries dating back to 1872, the same year etched on the graves the boys had discovered. "It's a diary," Manuel murmured, scanning the first page. "Belonging to Thomas Connolly." As Manuel began to read aloud, the true horror of the Hilltop Ranch began to unfold, a history far more terrifying than anything they had yet encountered. Manuel's voice filled the silent room as he read from Thomas Connolly's journal. April 12, 1872. "We have finally completed our home on the hill. Elizabeth adores the view of the valley. Sarah has selected a plot for her garden. After years of saving, we have our piece of heaven. The native tribes warned us about this land, said it was sacred, forbidden. But what do they know of progress, of a man's right to build his legacy?" June 3, 1872. "While digging the well, I discovered something unusual. A stone chamber some 20 feet down, clearly man-made but unlike any construction I've seen. Inside, a wooden box, elaborately carved. The craftsmanship is remarkable. I've brought it to the surface for further examination." Manuel paused, looking up at his family. "This must be the box," Elena nodded grimly. "Keep reading." June 10, 1872. "Cannot open the box by conventional means. No visible seams or locks, yet something shifts inside when moved. Sarah insists I rebury it. Says it gives her nightmares. Nonsense. Have written to Professor Hargrove at the university about my find." July 22, 1872. "Hargrove arrived today. Fascinated by the box. Says the symbols are unlike any known language, possibly predating Native American settlements. He believes it to be thousands of years old. Attempted various methods to open it without success. Hargrove took extensive notes and sketches before departing. Promised to consult colleagues. August 4, 1872, first incident last night. Awakened by sounds outside, scratching at the doors, windows. Sarah claims she saw figures moving in the darkness. Found unusual tracks in the dirt this morning, like bare feet but too narrow, toes too long. Elizabeth has developed a persistent cough." As Manuel continued reading, the journal detailed a gradual escalation of disturbing events. Livestock found exsanguinated. Crops withering despite adequate rainfall. Strange symbols appearing carved into trees around the property. October 17, 1872. Elizabeth's condition worsens. Dr. Finch baffled. Her skin grows pale, nearly translucent. She speaks of voices calling to her from the box, which now sits in my study. I've contemplated destroying it, but something prevents me. When alone with it, I too hear whispers. They promise knowledge, power. December 25, 1872, a hollow Christmas. Elizabeth confined to bed. Sarah barely speaks anymore, haunted by nightly visitations. Claims they stand at the foot of our bed, watching. I've taken to sleeping in shifts, shotgun in hand. The box has begun to warm to the touch, almost like flesh. The entries grew more erratic over time, the handwriting deteriorating. Thomas described attempting to leave the property, only to find themselves inexplicably returning each time, as if drawn back by an unseen force. February 18, 1873. Hargrove returned with translator. Ancient language identified as pre-Sumerian, possibly older. Partial translation of symbols. Vessel of the Watchers. Hargrove, concerned by our appearances, urged us to abandon the property. Tried to take the box. Couldn't bear to part with it. Sarah struck him with fire iron when he insisted. He fled. We are alone now, as we should be. Manuel's voice faltered as he turned to entries from 1888, 15 years later. The handwriting was barely recognizable. The words a jumbled stream of paranoia and revelation. March 3rd, 1888. They have shown me the truth. We are not meant to leave. We are caretakers, guardians. The box must remain. Elizabeth understands now. Her body failed, but they have made her one of them. She stands outside my window each night, beautiful in her new form. Sarah resists still, not for long. March 10th, 1888. Blood is the key. Always was. Cut my palm tonight, let drops fall on the box. It opened, such wonders inside, such horrors. The Watchers were imprisoned for defying natural order, ancient beings who walked between worlds. Now they walk again, through us, with us, as us. The final entry was dated March 15th, 1888. It ends tonight. I have failed as their vessel. The Watchers have chosen another. They come with the night. I have prepared the necessary ritual. The box must be sealed again, the cost paid in blood. My blood. All of our blood. May God forgive what I must do to my family. May God forgive what we have unleashed. The journal ended there. Manuel closed it slowly, the room silent except for Maria's soft whimpers. The graves, Joaquin whispered, cradling his injured arm. 1888, that's when they died. Murdered by Thomas, Elena added, crossing herself. To seal the box again. Manuel placed the journal on the table, but it wasn't sealed properly. Or someone opened it again. He looked around at his terrified family. And now we're part of this legacy. We have to leave, Elena insisted. Now. Tonight. Manuel shook his head slowly. Didn't you hear? Connolly's tried to leave multiple times. Something drew them back. He gestured to the scattered ashes where the box had been. But maybe we've done what Thomas couldn't. The box is destroyed. But the entities outside, Roberto pointed out, they're still there. I can feel them watching. As if in confirmation, a soft scratching sound resumed at the front door. The family froze, listening to the gentle, persistent scraping of what could have been fingernails, or claws. The ritual, Manuel said suddenly. Thomas mentioned a ritual to seal them away. He grabbed the journal again, flipping frantically through the pages. There must be details here somewhere. As Manuel searched, the scratching grew louder, more insistent. Frost began to form again on the windows, despite the box's destruction. We need to find what Thomas discovered, Manuel said urgently. Before those things find another way in. The scratching intensified as Manuel desperately scanned the journal's final pages. There's nothing here, he said frantically. Just ravings and weight. He stopped at a page where the corner had been folded. Holding the journal to the lantern light, he could make out faint indentations behind the writing, as if Thomas had pressed too hard while writing on the next page. There's something hidden here, Manuel said. Using the edge of his knife, he carefully scraped at the paper, revealing words written in what appeared to be dried blood. The vessel may be destroyed, but the passage remains open. Seal it where it began. The well. Blood of the innocent, blood freely given. The well, Elena repeated. He found the box in the well. Manuel nodded grimly. And that's where we need to go. Now? Joaquin asked incredulously. With those things outside? We have no choice, Manuel replied. The journal says they can't enter unless invited. That's why they're scratching, trying to get us to open the doors. He looked around at his frightened family. The well is our only chance. Elena clutched Maria tighter. What does it mean? Blood of the innocent. Manuel's face darkened. I think Thomas killed his family as sacrifices. But the journal also mentions blood freely given. There might be another way. A new sound joined the scratching. A low, rhythmic thumping, as if something heavy was hurling itself against the doors and windows. The house shuddered with each impact. They're getting stronger, Roberto whispered. Manuel made a quick decision. There must be access to the well from inside the house. Older properties often had an interior connection for winter months. He looked around. We need to find the cellar. A systematic search revealed a trapdoor beneath a faded rug in the kitchen. Manuel pulled it open, revealing a set of narrow wooden stairs descending into darkness. I'll go first, he said, taking the lantern. Joaquin, help your mother with Maria letters, Roberto. Stay close. The family descended into the cellar, a damp, earthen-floored space lined with rough stone walls. Old shelves held dusty preserve jars and forgotten tools. At the far end, partially obscured by stacked crates, stood a wooden door with iron banding. That must lead to the well, Manuel said, moving toward it. As they approached, Maria suddenly spoke, her voice oddly flat. They're waiting for us. The Watchers, Elena gasped, looking down at her daughter. The child's eyes reflected the lantern light strangely, seeming to glow from within. Maria? Elena shook her gently. Mijita, what's wrong? The girl's head tilted at an unnatural angle. Maria sleeps now. We speak through the innocent. We have always been here. Before the box. Before the well. This is our place. Manuel stepped forward, his voice shaking. What do you want from us? A smile spread across Maria's face, too wide, revealing too many teeth. What all imprisoned things want. Freedom. Vessels. Passage. Let my daughter go, Elena demanded, tears streaming down her face. Maria's expression changed, becoming confused, then frightened. She blinked rapidly, the strange light fading from her eyes. Mama, what's happening? I'm scared. Elena embraced her, shooting a desperate look at Manuel. We need to end this. Now. Manuel turned back to the door, throwing his weight against it. The ancient wood groaned but held firm. Help me, he called to Joaquin and Roberto. Together, the three of them rammed the door until it finally gave way, revealing a narrow tunnel hewn from the earth. This leads to the well, Manuel said, holding the lantern ahead. Stay together. The tunnel extended about 20 feet before opening into a larger chamber. In its center was a circular stone structure, the well. But what caused the family to stop in horrified awe was what surrounded it. The walls of the chamber were covered in symbols identical to those that had adorned the box, carved directly into the living rock. They seemed to pulse with an internal light, casting eerie shadows that moved independently of the lantern's glow. The well itself was sealed with a heavy stone lid, elaborately carved with a central symbol, a circle divided by 3 intersecting triangles. This is it, Manuel whispered. The passage Thomas wrote about. As they approached the well, Maria suddenly stiffened in Elena's arms. They're coming, she said in her own voice, tinged with terror. They found another way in. From the tunnel behind them came that familiar rattling breath, multiplied now, growing louder. Shadows began to fill the passage they had just traversed. Quickly, Manuel urged, handing the lantern to Roberto. He and Joaquin bent to lift the stone lid. It was impossibly heavy, but with desperate strength. They managed to slide it partially off, revealing a bottomless darkness below. The air that rose from the open well was ancient and foul, carrying whispers in that same unknown language they had heard from the box. The ritual, Elena reminded them urgently, her eyes fixed on the approaching shadows. Blood freely given. Manuel nodded grimly, drawing his knife. It calls for innocent blood. But I think it means blood given willingly, not taken by force. He looked at his family. I'll do it. No. Joaquin stepped forward, extending his uninjured arm. Let me. I'm the one who closed the box. I'm connected to this now. He gestured to his frostbitten limb. They've already marked me. Before Manuel could protest, Joaquin took the knife and drew it across his palm. Blood welled immediately, darkened the lantern light. What do I do? He asked, voice steady despite his fear. Manuel consulted the journal one last time. Let the blood fall into the well while speaking the words written here. He pointed to a phrase transcribed phonetically. Joaquin held his bleeding hand over the darkness and repeated the strange syllables. His blood dripped down, disappearing into the void. For a moment nothing happened. Then a low rumble began beneath their feet. The symbols on the walls flared brightly, then dimmed. From the well came a sound like 1,000 voices screaming in unison, rising to a deafening crescendo before cutting off abruptly. The shadows in the tunnel wavered, then receded, as if pulled back by an invisible force. Is it working? Roberto asked, hope threading through his voice. The stone lid of the well began to slide back into place on its own, moving with purpose. As it sealed the opening, the symbols on the chamber walls faded completely, leaving only ordinary rock behind. A profound silence fell, broken only by their ragged breathing. I think it's done, Manuel said cautiously. I think we've sealed them away. Elena wasn't convinced. Okay, we need to leave this place now. Tonight, no one argued. They made their way back through the tunnel, up to the cellar, and into the house. The oppressive atmosphere had lifted. Quote, the frost on the windows had melted. Outside, dawn was breaking, pale light pushing back the darkness. Manuel checked each window and door. No scratches marred the wood, no shadowy figures lurked in the yard. The world seemed ordinary again. But none of them could forget what they had witnessed, what they now knew lurked beneath their property. Pack only what we need, Manuel instructed. We leave within the hour. As the family gathered their essential belongings, Elena found Manuel staring at the journal. We should burn it, she suggested. Destroy all evidence. Manuel shook his head slowly. No. Someone needs to know, in case they ever return. He closed the journal carefully. We'll take it with us, find someone who can help understand what happened here. What's still happening here? By full sunrise, the Torres family had loaded their wagon and were heading down the dirt road, away from Hilltop Ranch. None of them looked back at the house silhouetted against the morning sky, standing empty once more, waiting for its next occupants. The Torres family traveled east without stopping, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and Hilltop Ranch. They spoke little during the journey, each lost in their own thoughts, processing the horrors they had witnessed. Maria slept fitfully in Elena's arms, occasionally murmuring words in that strange language they had heard from the well. By mid-afternoon, they reached the town of Clearwater, a small but thriving community about 20 miles from their abandoned property. The main street bustled with activity, merchants hawking wares, farmers selling produce, children playing in the dusty road. "We'll stop here," Manuel decided. "Find somewhere to stay the night, then decide our next move." They drew curious stares as they made their way through town, partly because they were strangers, partly because of their obvious Mexican heritage. Manuel was accustomed to such attention, but it made him uncomfortable now, feeling exposed and vulnerable after their ordeal. At the edge of town stood a modest church, its white steeple rising above the surrounding buildings. Manuel steered the wagon toward it, something drawing him to the simple structure. As they approached, a man emerged from the church, tall and lean, with silver-streaked dark hair and skin the color of burnished copper. He wore the collar of a priest, though his features suggested Native American ancestry. "Welcome, travelers," he called, raising a hand in greeting. "I am Father Thomas Blackwood." Manuel nodded respectfully as he pulled the wagon to a stop. "Manuel Torres, my wife Elena, our children Joaquin, Roberto." And Maria Letter's father Blackwood's gaze lingered on Joaquin's bandaged arm, then moved to Maria's sleeping form. His expression shifted subtly, a flicker of recognition or concern crossing his features. "You come from the west," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Manuel replied cautiously. We had a property there. We've decided to move on." The priest nodded slowly. "The Hilltop Ranch, I presume?" Manuel stiffened, exchanging a glance with Elena. "How did you know?" "Please come inside," Father Blackwood said, gesturing toward the church. "You look exhausted, and your son needs medical attention. We can speak privately there." Inside, the church was cool and dimly lit, sunlight filtering through simple stained-glass windows. Father Blackwood led them to a small room at the back, furnished with a table, chairs, and a narrow bed. "Sister Margaret has some medical training," he said, motioning to an elderly nun who had appeared silently behind them. "She can tend to your son's arm while we talk." As Sister Margaret examined Joaquin's frostbitten limb, Father Blackwood brewed tea over a small stove in the corner. His movements were deliberate, practiced, as if performing a ritual. "You're wondering how I knew where you came from," he said, placing cups before them. "The answer is simple. You're not the first to flee that place." He settled into a chair across from them. "My mother was Cheyenne. Her people knew the hill as Watcher's Mound, a forbidden place. When settlers came, they were warned, but few listened." Manuel reached into his coat, producing Thomas Connolly's journal. "We found this," he said, placing it on the table. "It tells part of the story." Father Blackwood took the journal reverently, opening it with careful fingers. "Connolly," he murmured. "Yes, I've heard the name. The church records mention a family that disappeared in the late 1880s. As the priest scanned the pages, his expression grew increasingly grave. Finally, he closed the book and looked up at Manuel and Elena. "You've seen them," he stated. "The Watchers." Elena nodded, tears welling in her eyes. They spoke through our daughter." Father Blackwood's gaze shifted to Maria, who was now awake, sitting quietly on Elena's lap. "Child," he said gently, "do you remember what they said to you?" Maria looked up at him with solemn eyes. "They said they were here before everything, that they're trapped and want to be free." She paused, then added in a whisper, "They're still calling me." The priest nodded as if this confirmed something. "The Cheyenne legends speak of ancient beings who existed before mankind. Imprisoned beneath the earth by the Creator because they sought to remake the world in their image. Over centuries, they found ways to influence the surface world, to call to those who might free them. The box," Manuel said. "Connolly found it in the well. A vessel," Father Blackwood agreed. "One of many scattered throughout this land. The symbols you saw were part of a binding spell, meant to contain their influence. When the box was opened, we sealed the well," Joaquin interjected, wincing as Sister Margaret applied a poultice to his arm. "With blood. My blood." The priest studied him intently. "Freely given," he murmured. "Yes, that would work temporarily. But the seal is imperfect without the proper ritual, the proper knowledge." "Then they'll return?" Elena asked, horror in her voice. "Eventually," Father Blackwood confirmed, "but not immediately. Your son's sacrifices bought time." Manuel leaned forward urgently. What can we do? We can't go back there. The priest was silent for a long moment, contemplating. There are those who have studied these matters, he finally said. Scholars of the ancient and the hidden. I correspond with a few. With this journal and your testimony, above quotes, he tapped the book thoughtfully. Perhaps a more permanent solution can be found. And until then? Alina asked. Father Blackwood smiled gently. Until then, you are welcome here. The church owns a small house nearby, currently vacant. You can stay as long as needed. Manuel shook his head. We can't impose. It is no imposition, the priest interrupted. It is our duty. You have faced darkness few have witnessed and survived. That creates a bond, a responsibility. His expression grew serious. Besides, your daughter will need protection. Once touched by the Watchers, one is rarely released entirely from their influence. Alina pulled Maria closer. What you mean? They will call to her in dreams, try to use her as a beacon to find their way back. Father Blackwood's voice was compassionate but firm. She will need guidance to resist them. I can provide that guidance. Manuel and Elena exchanged a long look, communicating without words as only long-married couples can. Finally, Manuel nodded. We accept your offer, Father, with gratitude. As night fell over Clearwater, the Torres family settled into the small house behind the church. It was simple but clean, with enough beds for all of them. For the first time since arriving at Hilltop Ranch, they felt safe. But as they prepared for sleep, Maria approached her father with worried eyes. Papa, she whispered. I'm afraid to close my eyes. I'm afraid they'll find me in my dreams. Manuel knelt to embrace her. Father Blackwood gave you this, remember? He touched the small silver cross hanging around her neck. He blessed it specially to protect you. Maria fingered the cross dubiously. But what if it doesn't work? Then we'll be right here, Manuel promised. All of us. Together. Nothing can harm you while we're together. As his daughter finally drifted to sleep, Manuel gazed out the window at the church silhouetted against the night sky. The journal sat on a table nearby, its secrets partially revealed but still largely mysterious. Whatever dwelled beneath Hilltop Ranch remained contained for now. But Manuel knew their ordeal wasn't truly over. The Watchers had marked his family, particularly Maria Letters, and somehow he sensed they would not relinquish their claim easily. For tonight, though, they had found sanctuary. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions. For now, that was enough. 3 weeks passed in relative peace. The Torres family gradually adjusted to life in Clearwater, cautiously integrating into the community. Manuel found work as a carpenter, his skilled hands in demand for repairs and furniture making. Elena helped at the church, cleaning and cooking alongside Sister Margaret. The boys enrolled in the local school, where they faced some prejudice but also made a few friends. Maria spent much of her time with Father Blackwood, who taught her what he called protective practices, prayers, meditation techniques, and simple rituals designed to shield her mind from unwanted influences. The child took to these lessons with surprising aptitude, her solemn demeanor giving way occasionally to flashes of her former carefree self. Meanwhile, Father Blackwood had sent copies of the Connolly Journal to colleagues in Boston and St. Louis scholars. He trusted to treat the information with appropriate gravity and discretion. On a crisp autumn evening, Manuel returned home to find an unfamiliar horse tethered outside their small house. Inside, he discovered Elena serving tea to Father Blackwood, and a stranger, a middle-aged woman with steel-gray hair cut unusually short, wearing a practical traveling suit that bore the dust of a long journey. Ah, Manuel, Father Blackwood rose to greet him. This is Professor Abigail Winters from Boston University. She's come in response to my letters. The woman stood, extending a firm hand. Mr. Torres, I have been most eager to meet you and your family. Her accent marked her as educated Eastern, but there was nothing condescending in her direct gaze. Professor Winters is an anthropologist, Father Blackwood explained. But her true specialty is somewhat unconventional. I study what conventional academia rejects, she said simply. Ancient beliefs, forbidden knowledge, the intersection of myth and reality. She gestured to a leather satchel beside her chair. I've brought materials that may help us understand what you encountered at Hilltop Ranch that evening. After the children were asleep, the adults gathered around the kitchen table. Professor Winters spread out several items, yellowed manuscripts, hand-drawn maps, and photographs of artifacts bearing symbols similar to those they had seen on the box and in the well chamber. What you encountered has been documented across various cultures and time periods, she began, her voice low and measured. The names change, Watchers, Grigori, Nephilim, Anunnaki, but the descriptions remain consistent. Ancient entities of enormous power, imprisoned beneath the earth. By God, Lena asked, fingering the cross at her neck. Professor Winters smiled slightly. By something. The oldest texts are unclear on the who, focusing instead on the why. These beings sought to reshape creation according to their own design, to rewrite the fundamental laws of existence. And the boxes? Manuel asked. The wells? Weak points? The professor replied. Places where the barrier between their prison and our world has thinned. The boxes serve as conduits, allowing their influence to seep through gradually. She tapped a photograph showing a carved stone tablet. According to these Sumerian texts, the original binding required 7 seals at 7 sites across the world. Over millennia, some have been broken, others weakened. Father Blackwood leaned forward. And Hilltop Ranch contains one of these seals? I believe so. Professor Winters extracted a large map from her satchel, unfolding it carefully. It showed North America with several locations marked in red ink. Based on my research, there are 3 major binding sites in what is now the United States. One in New England, documented in 1692, the Salem witch trials, Father Blackwood murmured. Precisely. Another in Louisiana, connected to certain Vodou traditions. And the third ... she placed her finger directly on western Oklahoma territory. Here, on land that changed hands repeatedly among native tribes, none wishing to settle permanently. Manuel studied the map thoughtfully. The Bedfords are neighbors near the ranch. They seemed to know something of its history, yet they remained living nearby. Guardians, perhaps, Professor Winters suggested, whether they know it or not. Throughout history, certain bloodlines have been drawn to these sites, compelled to watch over them. What about our daughter? Elena asked anxiously. Maria says they still call to her in dreams, though Father Blackwood's teachings have helped her resist. The professor's expression grew grave. The Watchers seek vessels, particularly children whose minds are more open to influence. Once they've established a connection ... double quotes, she hesitated. Tell us, Manuel insisted. No matter how difficult, the connection is permanent, she said gently. It cannot be broken, only managed. Your daughter will always be sensitive to their presence, their call, but this can be turned to advantage. She reached for Maria's journal, which the girl had been keeping at Father Blackwood's suggestion, recording her dreams and experiences. With proper guidance, she can serve as an early warning system, sensing their activities before they manifest physically. Elena covered her face briefly. She's just a child. Yes, Professor Winters acknowledged, and I would not suggest using her abilities actively, but acknowledging them, helping her understand them, that's crucial for her protection. Manuel's mind was racing. You said the seal at Hilltop Ranch was one of 7. What happens if all 7 are broken? The professor's eyes met his directly. The end of the world as we understand it. It's not destruction necessarily, but transformation into something beyond human comprehension or survival. A heavy silence fell over the room, broken eventually by Father Blackwood. What can be done? How can the seal be repaired permanently? Professor Winters began gathering her materials. That's why I'm here. With the information from Connolly's journal and my own research, I believe I can reconstruct the original binding ritual. But it will require returning to Hilltop Ranch. Manuel and Elena exchanged alarmed glances. That's not possible, Manuel stated flatly. I understand your reluctance, the professor said. But consider, your family temporarily resealed the passage with an improvised ritual. A proper binding, performed correctly, would secure it for generations. You're asking us to risk our lives, our children's lives, Elena protested. Professor Winters nodded soberly. I am, because the alternative is worse. Your temporary seal will weaken. The Watchers will find another way, another family. The cycle will continue until they succeed. Father Blackwood placed a calming hand on Elena's arm. No decision needs to be made tonight. Professor Winters will be staying in town for several days. We have time to consider options. As the priest and professor prepared to leave, Winters paused at the door. One more thing. The Connolly journal mentions a Professor Hargrove who examined the box in 1872. Yes, Manuel confirmed. What of it? Hargrove was my great-grandfather, she said quietly. His notes about the Hilltop Ranch have been passed down through my family for generations, along with a sense of ... unfinished business. I've spent my life studying what he only glimpsed. Her expression was both apologetic and resolute. This isn't just academic for me, Mr. Torres. I have my own connection to this mystery. After their visitors departed, Manuel and Elena sat in silence, the weight of revelation heavy between them. We can't go back there, Elena finally whispered. We can't expose the children to those ... things again. Manuel rubbed his face wearily. If what she says is true, we're already exposed. Especially Maria Letters. He reached across the table for his wife's hand. I don't want to return either. But if there's a chance to end this permanently, all quotes, and if we fail, Alina challenged. If we make things worse? Manuel had no answer for that. They retired to bed without resolution, each troubled by the choices before them. In her small bedroom, Maria sat upright, eyes open but unseeing. Her hand moved mechanically across a page in her journal, drawing symbols identical to those from the well chamber. Her lips moved silently, forming words in that ancient, forbidden language. Outside her window, a shadow darker than the night watched with patient, endless hunger. The decision was not made easily. For days, the Torres family debated, argued, and prayed over Professor Winter's proposal. Elena remained staunchly opposed, while Manuel gradually accepted the necessity. The children were initially excluded from these discussions, but Joaquin, overhearing enough to piece together the situation, insisted they should have a say in matters that affected them so directly. It was Maria, surprisingly, who tipped the balance. "They're getting stronger," she announced during breakfast one morning, her small face serious beyond her years. "I can feel them pushing against the seal, like water behind a cracking dam." Alina dropped her spoon. "What do you mean, Majida?" Maria looked down at her hands. "In my dreams I see the well. The stone lid is cracking. They whisper that they're coming, that next time they'll find stronger vessels." She looked up, eyes shimmering with tears. "They show me other families arriving at the ranch. Other children. What happens to them? Over and over." Manuel exchanged a glance with Elena, who had gone pale. "These are just dreams," he said gently. "Not visions of the future." "No, Papa," Maria said with quiet certainty. "They're showing me what will happen if we don't help Professor Winters. They want me to be afraid, to stay away. Which means double quotes, her voice grew stronger. Which means we should go back. We should stop them." The simple logic of her conclusion, delivered with childlike directness, silenced further debate. If the Watchers wanted them to stay away, perhaps returning was exactly what they should do. 2 days later, an unusual party assembled outside the church at dawn: Manuel and Elena Torres, their 3 children, Father Blackwood, Professor Winters, and unexpectedly, Joseph Bedford, who had ridden into town the previous evening with news that the abandoned Torres wagon had been discovered near Hilltop Ranch, surrounded by strange tracks. "Martha hasn't been sleeping," Bedford explained grimly. "Says she hears whispering on the wind, coming from the hill." His weathered face was lined with fatigue. "I need to see this ended one way or another." Their preparations were thorough. Professor Winters had spent days translating ancient texts, comparing the symbols from Connolly's journal with those in her own reference materials. Father Blackwood had blessed various items: water, salt, silver crosses for each member of the party. Manuel had constructed special containers according to the professor's specifications, 7 small boxes of seasoned oak, lined with lead and inscribed with protective symbols. As they loaded their wagons, Elena approached Professor Winters privately. "If anything happens to my children," she said, her voice low but fierce, "I will hold you personally responsible." The professor met her gaze steadily. "As you should, Mrs. Torres. As you should." The journey to Hilltop Ranch took most of the day. They traveled in tense silence, each lost in private thoughts and fears. As they approached the property, the familiar sense of wrongness descended, the unnatural quiet, the absence of birds, the heaviness in the air. The house stood as they had left it, door ajar, windows open. Nothing appeared to have changed, yet Manuel felt certain they were expected, observed. They made camp a short distance from the house, not willing to sleep under its roof again. As darkness fell, they gathered around a large fire, its flames providing both light and comfort against the growing chill. "We should begin at first light," Professor Winters announced, consulting her notes. "The ritual must be completed during daylight hours, when their influence is weakest." "What exactly will this ritual entail?" Elena asked, keeping Maria close at her side. Gaprasa sighed, removing her spectacles to rub her eyes. "In simplest terms, we must strengthen the original binding that imprisons the Watchers. This requires several elements: the correct incantations, specific materials, and double quotes." She hesitated. "And blood," Manuel finished for her. "Like before." "Yes," Winters admitted. "Blood freely given, but not just any blood. According to my translations, the binding requires blood from 7 different sources, representing the 7 original sealers." "7 of us must participate?" Father Blackwood asked. "Exactly. Each contributing a small amount willingly given." She looked around the circle. "I've prepared 7 rolls, each with specific words to recite and actions to perform." Manuel nodded grimly. "I'll be one, of course." "And I," said Joseph Bedford. I as well, added Father Blackwood. Count me in, Joaquin said firmly, ignoring his mother's alarmed glance. Professor Winters herself would be the fifth participant. That left them one short, as Roberto was deemed too young, and Maria's connection to the Watchers made her participation dangerous. All eyes turned to Elena, who sat rigid with fear and determination. I will do it, she said quietly. For my children. For all children who might come after. Professor Winters nodded approvingly. Good. That gives us 6. The 7th. ... She produced a small vial from her pocket, containing a dark liquid. I brought a sample of my great-grandfather's blood, preserved through a process he developed. His bloodline has a connection to this place as well. As they discussed the details of the ritual, Maria suddenly stiffened, her eyes widening. They know, she whispered. They know what we're planning. The fire flickered violently, then diminished, plunging the camp into semi-darkness. From the direction of the house came the now familiar sound, that rattling, labored breathing, multiplied many times over. They're coming, Maria said, her voice oddly calm. They want to stop us before we begin. Father Blackwood quickly distributed the silver crosses. Form a circle, he commanded. Backs to the fire, facing outward. They complied hastily, the adults positioning themselves to shield the children. Manuel gripped his revolver, though he knew from experience it would have little effect against the entities. Shadows detached themselves from the deeper darkness surrounding the camp. 5, then 10, then too many to count, vaguely human-shaped but wrong in their proportions, their movements. They encircled the group, maintaining a distance just beyond the fire's light. They can't approach the flame, Professor Winters observed. Fire is anathema to them, represents the divine spark of creation they sought to corrupt. As if in response to her words, the shadows began to move in unison, circling their camp with increasing speed. The air grew colder, frost forming on the ground despite the season. What are they doing? Elena whispered, clutching Maria tightly. Trying to extinguish our fire, Father Blackwood realized. Creating a vortex to draw away the air. Indeed, the flames were dimming, starved of oxygen by the unnatural whirlwind the entities had generated. If the fire died, their only protection would vanish with it. Manuel made a quick decision. Everyone to the wagons, he ordered. Now. They scrambled to obey, gathering their essential supplies. Manuel grabbed a burning branch from the fire, using it to light a prepared torch. The party rushed to the wagons, climbing aboard as the shadows closed in. Drive for the house, Professor Winters called out. It's our only chance. The house? Elena cried in disbelief. That's where they came from. Trust me, the professor insisted. They can't enter without invitation. The threshold will protect us until dawn. Manuel snapped the reins and the wagon lurched forward. Bedford followed in the second wagon, torch held high. The shadow entities surged after them, moving with impossible speed. As they raced toward the house, Maria suddenly stood in the wagon, facing their pursuers. Before Elena could stop her, the child raised her arms and spoke a single phrase in that ancient language, the same words. Professor Winters had been practicing for the ritual. The effect was immediate. The closest shadows recoiled as if struck, their forms momentarily destabilizing. It bought the wagons precious seconds to reach the house. They abandoned the vehicles in the yard, rushing up the porch steps and through the front door. Manuel was the last inside, slamming and bolting the door behind them. Through the windows they could see the shadow entities circling the house, their movements agitated but constrained. None approached the doors or windows. What just happened? Manuel demanded, turning to Maria, who swayed on her feet, exhausted by whatever she had done. Professor Winters was looking at the child with new understanding. She used their own language against them, the first words of the binding. She knelt before Maria Letters. How did you know those words, child? I've only been practicing them for a few days. They're in my dreams, Maria replied simply. They don't know I understand them when they speak among themselves. The professor exchanged meaningful glances with Father Blackwood. This changes matters, she said quietly. The child has a connection we can use. No, Elena said firmly. You said she couldn't participate in the ritual, not as one of the 7. No, Professor Winters clarified. That would be too dangerous. But as a conduit, a translator between worlds... He turned to Father Blackwood. It could strengthen the binding considerably. It could also put her at greater risk, the priest cautioned. While they debated, Manuel checked each window and door. The shadow entities remained outside, seemingly unable to enter, but their presence felt heavier, more substantial than before, as if they were gathering strength. We need to decide now, he interrupted. Those things aren't going to wait forever. They'll find another way in. Professor Winters nodded briskly. Very well. We proceed at dawn as planned. The 7 of us will perform the primary ritual. She looked at Maria thoughtfully. Only if we encounter difficulties, we might call upon Maria's unique abilities. But not unless absolutely necessary. Alina seemed ready to protest further, but Maria spoke first. I want to help, Mama. I need to help. She touched her mother's face gently. They're already in my head. This might be the only way to make them leave. As the others prepared for the ritual, arranging the materials Professor Winters had brought, Manuel took Joseph Bedford aside. Why did you really come? He asked bluntly. The truth. Bedford's weathered face showed no surprise at the direct question. Because my family has lived in the shadow of this hill for 3 generations, he replied. My grandfather was the first to settle nearby. He claimed to have been drawn to the place by dreams of guarding something ancient and dangerous. He met Manuel's gaze steadily. When you arrived at the ranch that day, Martha and I hoped you might break the pattern. When you fled, we knew you had failed, like all the others. Why didn't you tell us everything from the beginning? Bedford laughed bitterly. Would you have believed me? That my family has been bound to this place for nearly a century? Unable to leave? Compelled to watch as family after family is destroyed or driven away? He shook his head. Some burdens can't be shared until the listener is ready to hear them. As dawn approached, the house grew colder. Frost formed on the inside of the windows, spreading in patterns that resembled the symbols from the well chamber. The shadow entities outside had grown still, as if waiting. Professor Winters gathered them in the living room for final instructions. Once we begin, we must not stop until the ritual is complete, she warned. No matter what happens, no matter what you see or hear. And if we fail? Alina asked, voicing the fear they all shared. The professor's expression was grave. Then the seal breaks completely. And what emerges will make what you've seen so far seem gentle by comparison. With those sobering words hanging in the air, they watched the first rays of sunlight break over the eastern horizon. The time had come to confront the ancient evil beneath Hilltop Ranch, to bind it again, or to release it fully upon the world. The town of Clearwater, Oklahoma Territory still tells the story of Hilltop Ranch, though details have blurred over time. Some say the Torres family died performing an ancient ritual in the cellar. Others claim they succeeded and moved east, never to return. A few insist the entire family vanished without trace, like all previous occupants. What is known with certainty is that the ranch house burned to the ground in the autumn of 1898. The property has remained unclaimed and untouched since then, the land reverting to prairie grass and wildflowers. Local ranchers keep their cattle away from the hill. Hunters avoid it instinctively. Children dare each other to spend a night there, but few accept the challenge. Joseph Bedford and his wife Martha continued to live nearby until their deaths in the 1920s. Their descendants remain in the area, though none will discuss the hill or its history. Father Thomas Blackwood's church records contain a curious entry dated September 30th, 1898. The seal is renewed. The price was high. God forgive us our necessity. The page is stained with what appears to be blood in 7 distinct places. In the archives of Boston University, among the personal papers of the late Professor Abigail Winters, rests a leather-bound journal. Its final entry, written in a shaking hand, reads, "The child was the key, not as sacrifice but as bridge. The watchers now sleep more deeply than before, but vigilance must be maintained. I have established a trust to fund ongoing research. Future generations must not forget." Accompanying the journal are 7 small oak boxes lined with lead and sealed with silver. Each bears an inscription warning against opening. Each is empty. And somewhere in the eastern United States, it is said, lives a family descended from Mexican immigrants who settled there in the early 1900s. The women of this family share an unusual trait. They keep detailed dream journals, recording visions of ancient beings imprisoned beneath the earth. They are drawn to careers in archaeology, anthropology, religious studies. They correspond with similar families across the country and around the world. They remember, though they never speak of it openly. They watch, so others need not. They guard the seals, waiting for the day when the watchers stir again. For some burdens pass from generation to generation. Some battles must be fought repeatedly across time, and some victories are never truly complete. The hilltop stands empty, peaceful in appearance, but beneath it something waits, and dreams, and remembers.